Welcome to the world of the Transgo High Performance Shift Kit. In this video presentation, we'll show you step by step how to beef up your turbo hydromatic 4L60E transmission fast and easy with a Transgo Performance Shift Kit. You'll love it. This transmission is about to come alive. This video shows a typical installation. Its purpose is to help you install this kit with confidence. The written instruction booklet has specific instructions. Follow it to the letter carefully during the entire installation. Finish and review each step before moving on. When installing springs, follow the instructions for custom options, size, location, and color. When drilling any holes, follow instruction for proper size and custom options. When plugging any holes, follow instruction for proper chamfer, size, and location. Plugs are sometimes drilled to a specific orifice size. As you read, follow shift customizing options as they apply to your installation. Notice the If Trans is Apart pages. These are the typical tools needed to do the installation. First, let's road test the vehicle to see if the transmission is in good working condition. We just want to be sure it has 4 forward gears and reverse. Let's get started. Release the hood latch. Let's raise the hood and remove the dipstick. Okay, let's jack the vehicle up and support it with sturdy jack stands. Before we go under the car, let's gather the required tools. We will need an 8, 10, and 13 millimeter socket, speed handle, long screwdriver, small screwdrivers, drain pan, snap ring pliers, needle nose pliers, water pump pliers, and some wiping rags. Let's make sure you have the transmission that this kit fits. Notice the pan is large, rectangular, and has 16 pan bolts. Look here on the passenger side. We have a large vertical electrical connector. On the driver's side, we have the shift linkage and a line pressure tap. This is the right transmission. Let's get going. Place a drain pan under the transmission, favoring toward the front. If your pan bolts are hidden or too close to the crossmember here in the rear, you may need to remove the bottom rear mount bolt or bolts to gain access to the rear pan bolts. Pry up on the transmission and insert a socket between the frame and the mount. Now you can get to the bolts. With a 13 millimeter socket and a speed wrench, remove all the oil pan bolts except for one toward the rear here. If necessary, pry the pan loose, then loosen the last bolt slowly and let the oil run over the front edge of the pan. Lower the pan and lay it aside. Now let's remove the filter. If the transmission oil is still hot, protect your hands with a rag. While pulling down, slightly twist left and right until it frees up enough to be removed. Have a drain pan in position to catch the fluid that will run out of the filter and valve body. Place the filter in the transmission pan. Make sure the filter seal here is in good shape. Ours looks okay, so we will reuse it. Before removing the wiring, let's make a simple drawing showing how the wires are connected to the solenoids. Okay. Now, let's remove the wiring harness and these 2 solenoids. First, remove the bolts holding the wiring harness to the valve body. Now, unhook all the connectors except this one here. use a small screwdriver or an ice pick and remove this clip. Carefully pull this solenoid out of the valve body. Use a 10 millimeter socket and remove these two bolts here and here. Now carefully pry down with a slight twisting motion to remove the solenoid. Now let's tuck the wiring harness out of the way, like this. Place the drain pan under the valve body to catch the fluid that will drain from the valve body and transmission. Okay, let's get going. Now let's remove the valve body. It's held in place with 17 bolts. Some we have already removed. Notice the short 13 millimeter bolt that holds this detent spring in place right here. Remove it now using a 13 millimeter socket and set it in the pan. Change to the 10 millimeter socket and remove the 3 long bolts from this plate first. Remember where they go. Now remove all the rest of the 10 millimeter bolts. Change to an 8 millimeter socket and remove this bolt here. Now loosen this last bolt a half turn and let the valve body drain. Support the valve body and remove the bolt. Lower the valve body slowly until the manual lever link becomes vertical. Now move the valve body sideways and slide the link out of the valve like this. Lay the valve body upside down in the pan so it can drain. The valve body has check balls, but don't worry, the instruction sheet shows you where they go. Now let's remove these 3 10 millimeter bolts out of the second accumulator housing and lay it in the pan. Let's change to an 8 millimeter socket and remove 2 of the bolts from this plate. Slowly remove the last bolt and lower the separator plate. Be careful not to lose the check ball on the separator plate. Don't worry, the instruction sheet shows where it will go. If the 4th piston did not come down with the separator plate, remove it. Now let's take the pan with the valve body parts to the bench. Remove the parts from the pan and organize them on the bench so you can find them as you need them. Clean your pan. Let's take a minute or two to rest. Separator plate on the valve body, like this. Use a small amount of transmission fluid and oil the separator plate. Find the gasket with the letter C cut in it here. Lay it on the separator plate. Now turn the plate and gasket over like this and oil this side. The other gasket should have a V cut in it here. Lay the valve body gasket in place. Now turn the plate with both gaskets over again and position it correctly on the valve body. There is only one check ball that goes onto the separator plate. Let's put some Vaseline at the check ball location here and install the ball. Set the valve body and separator plate aside for now. Let's clean and dry the accumulator housing and the 2nd and 4th accumulator pistons with these tabs up. Now lube the sealing ring. Assemble the 4th accumulator like this. The big yellow spring goes into the pocket of the piston. Set this assembly, the 4th accumulator piston, and the other big yellow spring by the valve body. We will install them in a few minutes. Full piston cover. Look, it's right here. While prying in on the cover, use the small screwdriver to remove this snap ring. Look, pry it out here. Ah, there it comes. The piston has some spring tension on it, and the cover will move outward some. You can see the edge of the O-ring keeping the cover from coming out. At this slot in the case, we can get hold of the O-ring using our small screwdriver. Now pull downward while turning the cover with a pair of pliers. Pull on the O-ring until the cover comes out easily, like this. Now remove the entire assembly. Some vehicles don't have much room to work. You may need to remove it one piece at a time. Put the parts in the pan. Use a pair of long-nosed snap ring pliers like these and remove this snap ring. It holds the boost valve bushing, the pressure regulator springs, and the pressure regulator valve in the pump. Be careful here. The parts above the snap ring are under some spring tension. Carefully push up and release a few times so the bushing will come down without sticking. Remove the boost bushing and valve along with the pressure regulator springs and valve. Use a pair of needle nose pliers to remove the pressure regulator valve if it doesn't come down. Put these pump parts in the pan and take them back to the bench. Find the pressure regulator parts we just removed. Here they are. Set the boost valve and the original pressure regulator springs aside. You will be replacing them with these new high-performance springs and valve found in the kit. Here they are. Under the car we go. Place the pressure regulator valve on top of the new spring and push it up into the bore as far as you can. The spring will come back down. Set the new spring onto the stem of the new boost valve and the spring over that. Use a screwdriver to push the assembly up into place while using the snap ring pliers to install the new snap ring. Push up and release a few times, checking that the snap ring is seated in the groove. If you have trouble with the snap ring and just don't have enough hands, get a buddy with a long, thin screwdriver to help you. Let's go back to the bench. We will need to disassemble this component. Remove this E-clip here and take it apart. Now we need to remove this snap ring here . The retainer and the cushion spring or springs. Clean and dry all the parts. Now we're ready to put it back together. Next, install this spring, washer, and E-clip. Make sure the sealing rings are still in place on the second piston. If necessary, use a little Vaseline to hold them in place. Next, find the large red O-ring and install it on the second housing. Use a little Vaseline and lube the O-ring. Now place this assembly on the piston. It goes on like this. Find the fourth piston, make sure the sealing ring is in place. Use a little Vaseline to keep the sealing ring in the groove and to hold the ends together. Now slip the fourth piston onto the pin with the knob outward. Now install the blue O-ring on the cover and lube it with the Vaseline. Place the original return spring on the tapered end of the pin. Now put the second piston assembly and a fingerful of Vaseline in the pan. Now let's take these parts to the car. Be sure the return spring is still on the pin. Insert the pin and second piston assembly into the case. The second housing goes next, like this. If you don't have enough room, you may need to remove the E-clip and install this assembly a piece at a time. If you have to do this, don't forget to reinstall the spring, washer, and E-clip. Now slip the fourth piston onto the pin with the knob out. Cover in the bore. Push the cover in with a long screwdriver and install the snap ring like this. Yeah, that's great. With the snap ring installed, go to the opposite side of the transmission and reach in through this hole with a thin screwdriver to check for band clearance. You must be able to wiggle the band easily front to rear, 1/16 to 3/16 of an inch. The drum will move some, so be sure the band is moving back and forth on the drum. Ours looks good. Assemble the fourth accumulator like this. The big yellow spring goes into the pocket of the piston. The spring and piston go up into the bore of the case. Lift the separator plate up and into place, being careful not to dislodge the check ball. Use a short bolt from the solenoid here in the center to hold things up while we align the separator plate and gaskets and install the Z-bolts. Here and here. Be careful and line up all the holes. Now install this plate using the 3 short 8mm bolts. Tighten them evenly. Change to the 10mm socket and install the second accumulator assembly. And tighten the bolts evenly. Looks good. We can install the valve body at this time, but first remove the short bolt and the Z-bolts. The 4 different length bolts are referred to in the instruction sheets as A bolts, B bolts, C bolts, and D bolts. They're shown actual size, so pay attention to where they go. Make sure the check balls are still in place and guide the valve body up while hooking the manual link to the manual valve, like this. Push the valve body up into place while installing the C-length bolt here at the center, hand tight. Make sure the gaskets are in position and install the 2 Z alignment bolts. One of them is a long A length bolt, and it goes here through this plate. The other one is a D length bolt, and it goes here. Now install the other two long A length bolts here and here. The other short D length bolt goes here. The three 8mm B length bolts go toward the rear here, here, and here. Now install the rest of the valve body bolts. The remaining bolts should be C-length bolts. Do not make a mistake here. Double check yourself. There will be 3 A bolts here, 3 B bolts here, and 2 D bolts here. All the rest of the valve body bolts are C. When you're sure the valve body bolts are installed correctly, tighten them evenly. Remove the necessary bolts to install the wiring harness. Install the harness and tighten the bolts. The lockup solenoid is next. This is it here. Install the solenoid and the two short bolts. This solenoid is next. It goes here. Don't forget the clip. There. The solenoid can't fall out. Looks good. Now reconnect the wires. Refer to the drawing if necessary. Whoops! Almost forgot the detent spring and bolt. Let's do it now. Now recheck all the valve body and accumulator bolts. Make sure they're all tightened evenly. If you have any doubts about your work up to this time, double check it now. Check the new filter in this area for any cracks. If it's okay, lube the seal and install the filter. Place the pan gasket on the pan and lift the pan into place like this. Start all the bolts in a few turns. Now tighten all the pan bolts with a speed handle evenly. Double check each bolt. Lower the tail of the transmission. and install the mount bolt. Add 6 quarts of fluid and start the engine. Now immediately add 2 more quarts and check the dipstick for full. Look, it is still about a pint low. Let's add and recheck. There we go. It is still a little below full. After it warms up, we'll check it again. While the vehicle is still in the air, hold the brake and run through the gears from park to reverse, neutral, D4, D3, second, and now first. Let's move the selector to D4 and accelerate, checking for upshifts. As it shifts, watch the speedometer change speeds. There's the 1-2 shift, the 2-3 shift, and finally the 3-4 shift. Okay, we can lower the car. Double check the fluid level. It's right here just below the full mark. After our road test, we'll check it again. Let's road test the vehicle and check its new performance. Start with some light throttle upshifts and feel for the 1-2, the 2-3, and the 3-4 shifts. This will tell us if the valve body is working normally. Do we have good, quick, crisp shifts with no delays? Then try some upshifts at 3/4 throttle to see how the shifts get firmer with throttle. This one is okay. Yes, this transmission has come alive.